So this is March 9th, 2021. It's 5:35 PM. This is the Livingston, Montana Zoning Commission monthly meeting, Tuesday, the 9th. And we have present Michael Wojlak, Michael DeCellis, Matthew Menard, and I'm Jim Burr. So order just to go through the agenda. Are there any proposed additions to the agenda? Anything, Matthew, that has come through your office? Nothing? Okay.
Sean needs to get into the meeting. He's
Oh,
trying to get in.
thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay.
There you go.
There he is. Hey, Sean.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Good. Yeah, we're just getting started now, so you're just on time. As Wendy Weaver is not going to make it. So we're just starting going through the agenda. So we're at public comment. We don't have any of the public here to comment, so that's done. No old business. One thing I guess I didn't put in here is review and approval of the minutes to previous meetings. We've actually had two meetings. We had one 2 weeks ago, and then we had our monthly meeting. But Michael, we have not gotten copies of those to preview. Is there a way?
Oh, I just sent you the ones for the 25th, and then I sent the other meeting minutes right after that other meeting. So you have both of like a while ago.
I
I
have
can
not
send
reviewed those. How should we do this? Should I try to
I can send them to you again right now if you want both of them. So the ones the 25th you just should have gotten a second ago. And then what was our other meeting before that?
Oh, here we go, Mike. Okay.
The 9th. And then here are the ones on the 9th. So you have both of those in an email, Jen.
So the one that was from the 9th came through.
Did you get them?
Nope. Let me see here. Okay. Okay, I have, now I've opened up the meetings for the February 9th meeting. And let me share my screen and we can look that over quickly. If I can do this. So is that visible to you guys?
If you give me privileges, I can share my screen too. Do we do that? If you make me co-host, I can do it.
Yeah, if I can even get there. I'm having trouble. Um,
I think you got it.
Okay, did that show up now?
Yeah, and I also need to change it from conservation board. Tell I've been borrowing from others.
Yeah. So anyhow, this is February 9th meeting. Can everybody see this?
Mhm.
Um. All right. I'm just wondering here if we can kind of look at this through this. So approval of minutes, Jim Berg had some suggestions on changes. New business, Matthew Menard updating some text amendments and went through the staff report. And then under board comments, Michael Jessen had questions about, is that marijuana production and retail uses? Is that what that's about? I think that's what that means, isn't it, Michael? Here,
Yeah, if you want me to go back through and title that with marijuana production, I can.
I just wonder what MJ means.
It means marijuana, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mary Jane,
All
I don't
right.
know.
Yeah, okay. So Matthew said that it would be treated like alcohol production will stay in the industrial areas. And then there was some stuff. Here about large format retail. I think we're using large scale retail now as the official termination. So that probably should change. Let me see. Some current language to the code as a placeholder. Okay. And then there were these changes here. Change the 30,000 definition of large scale retail back to 20,000 square feet. Parking to the rear, building, landscaping. So that was agreed upon. So there's a few little minor things there. I can see, does anybody else have any questions or corrections to this? Well, can we, so I would like to, I don't know if you want to make a motion to approve this, these minutes with a few minor corrections to them. So those changes would be change MJ to marijuana,
Mhm,
change large format retail to large scale retail.
mhm.
And here we have LFT, change that to large scale retail. I guess that's all I'm seeing here. Do we have any notes in here about our decision to have a additional meeting on the 25th? I guess that didn't make it in here either. But
Do you want that to be the next agenda? I don't know where necessarily that would go in this format of minutes.
I think because that was made over email and not at a meeting, it should not be included in any of the meeting minutes. It's totally fine
Okay.
if it's not included anywhere
Okay.
because you have the authority to hold a special meeting and it's not something that requires a meeting to decide.
Okay, that's fine. Well, okay, then I will make a motion to approve the minutes with the few minor corrections that I've mentioned. We have a second?
I wasn't there, but I'll second them.
Thank you, Sean. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that got approved. Okay. That's that. Let's go back here. My inbox. Nope. So this is the 25th. That one we looked at again. Okay. Here's the 25th. So this was a special work session. I think we met here at 6 o'clock. I think
Oh, I think you're right.
6 to 7. Okay. So new business, proposed changes to parking and landscaping. Matthew Menard went through changes to the city had made to the zoning code. And then Matthew, I'm just curious about this sort of documentation here. Is that adequate for minutes, or should there be some more detail there?
Honestly, if I were writing the minutes, I probably would have just written board discussion with staff. Because we
nothing
have a
else.
recording, that is
Mhm.
totally fine and may actually be overkill from what we need. So I have no concerns with that.
Okay,
Cool.
Right.
This is what the conservation board did last time with all the different people talking, but you'd have to go, I don't know how you would keep track of timestamps, so.
Everything's recorded, so if anyone needs to ever like look up exactly what people are
Sure.
saying, we've got it on record.
Great, makes it easier for me.
okay. So maybe, Michael, what you could do is replace all of this material with just a sort of announcement that the board discussed the following topics, And then-
Sounds good.
made recommendations. Things like
Great.
that. Okay. So any other concerns or changes that anybody can see? If not, can we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Again, I wasn't there, but I will motion.
Thank you, Sean. Do we have a second?
I can second that.
Thank you. Thank you. Good. All those in favor of approving these minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye,
I
that's done. Okay. So now. Okay, how do we do this? Okay, so I stopped sharing for now. We have a guest coming in today. Just appearing now. Hi, can you introduce yourself, please? I'm seeing a Miss Love.
Oh, hi.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Daniela Love. I live at 705 Lochleven Drive in Livingston.
Great, well, welcome. So this is the monthly zoning commission meeting. We just finished looking through the minutes from two previous meetings and approved those. So I think it's next on the agenda will be to work our way through the building design standards in the zoning ordinance. So that would be that. If I can figure out how to do this. No. I don't know how to pull up the screen here. Nope. I'm trying to share my screen again.
The big green button at the bottom that says share screen should allow you to share whatever window you would like. You may have to mouse over the bottom of the screen for it to show up again.
There we go. Okay. I'm going to share a screen again. Okay, so here we have, can everybody see this screen? Let's, there we go. Can everybody see that? Okay, good. All right, so this is section 30.46, building design standards. And I'm trusting that you've had a chance to look at this a little bit. Maybe scroll through it or read through it again. Matthew's been so kind as to go through this and add in a lot of the suggestions that we've made previously to it, and doing some edits too. So I've got it showing here now with all of the review comments here too. And so what we did last time that was, I think, pretty useful is just to kind of work our way from top to bottom through this section, and anything that pops up that is of interest or concern, we can have a little discussion about it. So here we are in section A and B. It's to provide standards and policies for the design of commercial and industrial buildings in the design review overlay zone. And I know we've got a gateway overlay map. I know we've got a historic district overlay. But the design review overlay zone, I wasn't really familiar with. And so Matthew said that it was on the city's online map. And so I pulled that up. Can you see this? This is the city's zoning map from the website. And on the legend here, these are all the zones that we have. They're color coded. And then on top, there's this design review overlay zone. So that's what we're talking about. And Matthew, I was unable to look at this map and find where those zones were located.
They're both to the very east end of the city, and they are just off your map screen there.
Ah, okay.
So they're basically the vacant parcel next to the hospital and that very small parcel of CBD on Hart Cave / Yellowstone Preserve area. Those are the only two parcels in the city that are currently in the design review overlay zone.
Okay, so what that implies to me is that this building design review section that we're going through would only apply to these two areas.
Correct. We would have to do a zone map amendment to include additional parcels into the design overlay zone, and that's definitely something we should discuss as we're updating these standards.
Okay, so let's put that on the list of things to do. I was sort of assuming that we would, this section, the building design standards would apply to basically all commercial and industrial buildings in town. Was sort of my my inference from this, my assumption. And that possibly there would be well, or that we would, what would trigger the design review would be other criteria such as any commercial building over 20,000 square feet, something like that.
So we have added that with the last update where we define large scale retail, which isn't shown in here, but anything that's considered meets the definition of large scale retail would also be subject to these design standards. So if it's approved and the first reading was approved unanimously, so it's moving on to the second reading now. If that's approved, anything over 20,000 square feet that's commercial would be subject to these standards.
And would they go through this design review process then? Any building over 20,000? Okay, all right. So then, do you understand, do you know the background on why on the map, just those two areas were given an overlay?
My guess, well, I'm assuming that the only reason that there's not more overlays because no one's ever taken the action to update the zoning map. Those two, I believe, were included because they were, we talk about gateway overlay. This is basically what that I think was intended to be. And those were two properties that were annexed to be gateway commercial / industrial developments. It may not work out that way with the hospital property, but I believe when they were annexed, they had the design overlay to sort of fulfill that intent of it being a gateway overlay design standard.
Okay. Here we are again. So, I guess just to think about it down the road, we could certainly, right now, any commercial or industrial building over 20,000 would, in addition to these two areas, would have to go through this design review process.
Not any commercial and industrial, just the items meeting the definition of large scale retail. So that would be retail establishments over 20,000 square feet of floor area or outdoor space. Industrial is not included in that.
Okay. Okay, any thoughts on that? I think these design standards are certainly not written with the thought of it in an industrial project. There's certainly kind of, I think the vision was about retail kind of buildings. Okay. Well, I hope I'm clearer about that in my own mind anyhow. So then the next section, section B, here, objectives of building design. And there are a number of criteria here. One is to achieve high quality design. 2, to reflect the design traditions of Livingston. 3, to fit in with the natural settings. Oh boy, excuse me. And then to promote buildings that reflect pedestrian scale. So those are the objectives of this design review. So this is any building over 20,000 square feet that we would subject them to a design criteria. Why am I sneezing here?
So that means that, oh, can I ask a quick question?
Go ahead, Michael. Sure.
So basically, if you come into downtown Livingston, buy a building and you want to completely redo it, modern and differently, even though it says reflect the design traditions of Livingston. Even if it's 20,000 square feet, you could sort of reflect the traditions of Livingston, but you don't have to.
Well, if your building was under 20,000 square foot, this wouldn't apply.
You
What
can
you
do
do
whatever
have
you
down-
want.
What you do have downtown is a overlay for historic preservation. And
Is that the
that would-
preservation zoning? Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's not the zoning. So there's a historic district that has,
Mhm.
so if you do any building modification, and that includes things like painting, changing windows, changing doors, you have to go through historic design review if you're within the area that is in the historic preservation district. And that is a
Okay.
review by the Historic Preservation Commission to make sure that your changes are compatible with the federal historic preservation guidelines. That if you want to look at that district on our website, on the planning website, there's a historic district tab or a historic preservation commission tab. It'll show you the boundaries of that district, but it incorporates a good
Great.
chunk of downtown.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Right, so in kind of big picture on this section here is, I find pretty much all of these being very general. And there's very little sort of specific in this wording that would kind of ensure that the intent is carried out. And, I'm thinking in particular downtown about the building. It used to be the guest house on the corner of Main and Park. That's now the Albemarle apartment building. And that building, in my mind, is a complete aesthetic disaster. It was clearly intended to kind of mimic historic forms and materials, but was done so poorly that I think it really has hurt the quality of the visual experience downtown. So it's a real struggle to write design reviews that actually are successful. So one question though, I had put a question in here. Let's just say that somebody out by Murdoch's wanted to build a building over 20,000 square foot. So then this section would apply to them. What sort of design standards would we want a building out there to have? What would we want it to look like? What are the forms? What's the scale of it? What are the materials? If we think back about the most recent commercial buildings in Livingston, and I'm thinking of the new hotel by the freeway with Murdoch's and the Taco Bell that's there, and also maybe the Verizon store. Those are probably the newest commercial buildings that have been built here in Livingston. And it's kind of hard for me to see that this section of the zoning code has had any kind of impact on what they ended up doing. Is that a fair thing to say?
I will say that none of those structures were subject to this section of the zoning because none of them are in the design overlay district.
Okay.
So none of them would have had to, this section of the zoning currently the way it's written has no effect on any of those buildings because they're not in the design overlay district. And they wouldn't have been reviewed based on these criteria.
And so then the question would be going forward, if we have new commercial buildings being built, what would we want them to look like? How would we like them to affect our community? How would we like people to be able to use them? That would be sort of using those 4 buildings as kind of, or examples, how are they successful? How are they not successful? What do you like about them? What do you don't like about them? And how can we have a zoning ordinance that maybe makes an improvement over any new building? It's a big question. It's a hard question. I'm trained as an architect, and I keep, it's kind of a central question that we've got here, and I keep kind of hitting my head against the wall about it.
This
Yeah.
is Daniela. Sorry.
One
This is what I-
obvious thing you could do would to say that all new buildings in this section would sort of mimic historic buildings. If you look at the east end of Bozeman, for instance, all of those new buildings to some extent are mimicking old historic downtown structure. And that has created a certain cohesion in that part of town. And that's one possibility of a way to kind of set set sort of a set of design parameters for a building. I'm sure there are a lot of other towns out there. Leavenworth, Washington is kind of another town that's kind of historic. Everything there has been done in a historic fashion. So do we want that or do we not? Do we want to have some sort of say over what buildings?
So what's the mechanism for having that say? Is it that if they're not the 20,000 square footage, if that's not triggering it and it's not downtown?
There is no mechanism yet.
So we can
And
make
that would
one.
be-
Sounds like we need to extend this overlay zone. Is maybe
Mhm.
a step to take here.
That's
Get
certainly,
a zone map change so that we can include highway, commercial, and these areas.
well, maybe the thing to do would be to kind of work our way through these design standards. And once we get them to the point where we're sort of in agreement about them in terms of what we want this town to look like, then we can go back and say, well, where do we think we want this to apply? I mean, I think we've talked in the past about all along Park Street. And then we talked about the gateway overlay areas too, as being areas where we would want to create some sort of a visual coherence to the town.
Question,
Yes,
what's the body that does this review? Is it us? Is it the zoning commission? Someone is reviewing the design. Who's doing that? Just you?
at this
Right
point,
now, the way it's written, it's an administrative review.
Okay,
and is that a question up for change to it? In other words,
I like Matt.
I mean, there are towns and communities where something great big and great and ugly is proposed in a town, and it would be appropriate to have public hearings and let a lot of the public come and have their say, and also to have some very sort of specific criteria for what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And we don't have that in Livingston. All we have at this point is an administrative review.
And I will say that during the growth policy process, we discussed adding a recommendation to the growth policy to form a design review board, and that recommendation was not passed by the planning board. So that's something to be aware of, that there may not be a whole lot of buy-in from elected officials in the community on creating a design review board. They specifically voted on that and it failed pretty roundly.
What was the reasoning?
Design review boards historically have basically been used to stop affordable housing from happening almost universally throughout the, well, I shouldn't say universally, almost throughout, entirely throughout the United States. potentially the element of subjectivity that's brought into design review boards makes it less transparent for the public and developers. It makes it timelier and costlier to develop, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, there's pros to the design review boards as well, as in there's a public hearing on the design of a building, which gives the public a chance to comment and express whether or not they think the design fits with the community. I would say if any sort of design review board that's going to be set up, it needs to have a very strict set of review criteria, or else it just gets into a bunch of people saying they don't like the design because of things like it's the wrong color or windows or things like that. That's a big process if we're going to start talking about design review boards, and that may be, if you decide to go down that route, that's probably a several meeting process.
Yeah, we may not be a big enough town to have enough volunteers to sort of really commit to, sitting on those boards and handling all of that. So the question is all along Park Street, if somebody wants to buy up some property and make a new business and maybe tear down what's there and put up something big, there really is no design review there. Oh, we've got some zoning setbacks and height limitations, and then there's the building code, and that's sort of the limit on what control the community has over. Is that fair to say?
Jim, what's our process for public comment at this point in the meeting?
In this meeting?
Yeah. I just want to make sure Miss Love gets a chance to comment, but I don't know when the appropriate time for that is.
Well, let me ask her. Miss Love, do you have any specific concerns or questions that you have at this point, or do you want to?
Yeah, I just Miss Love at 705 Loch Laven. So I have the same question you have. I have the same concerns. And so that's why I'm here, is because I have noticed the buildings that are popping up in town, and it's not mimicking what this community should be going towards looking at. So I would like to see how I could be of service to make the process where there is a force that says, in criteria of what is allowed and what is not allowed, to make the community still be as authentic as possible.
Are you, when you talk about buildings, are you, what kind of, I'm just wondering which buildings you have in mind.
So the same ones you targeted, the new hotel, Murdoch's, Taco Bell, Domino's area, Verizon. I was very upset when Verizon came in. It was just kind of made me feel Livingston was headed a direction that I don't see it go to. And that's why I'm kind of getting involved as deeply as I am, to see if there's any motivation I could put towards seeing this community stay in its authenticness and really cherish the roots that it comes from, and creates more of a community and historical, cultural space. So I don't want to see more. I don't want to see more Verizons. I don't want to see more Taco Bells. I don't want to see more Murdochs. I want to see them in areas that's going to be surrounded by local resources.
Okay, thank you very much. And well, please stick with us for the rest of this meeting, and then I'd like to hear back from you again toward the end of the meeting to see if you have any further questions or comments at that point.
Yes, thank you.
I do think, that Verizon story is interesting. When it was first built and put up, it was, in my mind, quite garish. And the only redeeming value that I could put onto it is that if Verizon ever left vacant in the building, the style would be appropriate maybe for a Chinese restaurant. But they since went through kind of an exterior remodel on that building and toned it down quite a lot. But that's just sort of an aesthetic comment at this point, but it's once, and also it's quite a small building. I don't know how big it is, some thousands of square foot. So I think in terms of the ordinance material we're working on today, we really don't have any tools to even have a say in terms of what the exterior of that building might be. Now, we could have certainly had something to say about where that building was placed on the lot, where the parking was placed on the lot, how much landscaping there would be around the lot. But, you know, that may be the sort of limit on what we're able to do.
Hey, Jim, if I could quickly.
Yeah.
So if we were to adopt the design overlay zone, there wouldn't be a limit on that size. It would apply to all commercial. Let me make sure I'm saying this right. Yep, commercial and industrial buildings. So we do have some we could have some standards over the exterior appearance. I do want to make sure that we're not getting too prescriptive. As we go down this road, we don't get too prescriptive on buildings, which basically eliminates any form of architectural creativity or difference as we come into the city, because I think that's really important. And it's, you know, Daniela Love talked about authenticity. I do think being authentic to when things are built is also important. So I just want to make sure that that is taken into consideration as we move forward with
Right.
design standards.
Right. Well, I certainly like the idea of applying these design standards towards, you know, the design, or rather extending the design overlay zone to more parts of the city. And that would certainly be probably the mechanism to do that in the near term. So, yeah, Matthew, that's a real important and hard question there is, and I brought up the Albemarle because of that, where if your intent is to mimic and copy old historic buildings, and the person doing the design work doesn't have the talent or the experience or the budget to do that, and instead what they do is put a cheap cladding on the exterior of the building, which is what happened over at the Albemarle. And you know, the underlying building there was much more of an authentic, cohesive building than what ended up there. So it's very hard to put together design standards that feel authentic, that have a connection to the past. I spent a month when I was in architecture school in Stockholm, and that's an old historic town, goes back to the Middle Ages. And it actually, the center of the city is built on an island, so it was pretty compact. And all they had in going back for hundreds of years was just what we're doing. There was setbacks and there was a height limitation, and there was enormous pressure on that town to build it up. And what they let go was construction techniques and materials. They didn't say anything about that. So what you have then is a mix of buildings from different eras, and they're all about the same height, and they all face the street in the same way, and they have all this sort of similar rows of windows on the floors. And then what they've done in lots of places in Scandinavia, what they did was the creativity was done at the human scale. So you would find custom cast or bronze door handles, for instance, or little details that made each individual building unique. So I've always had that in the back of my mind, that we don't need to say, gotta be brick, and it's gotta look like one of the buildings downtown.
And I will say that the federal historic design guidelines, when you do an addition to a historic building or you replace doors and things like that, they explicitly state that you are not to mimic the historic building, that you are to make it look distinct from the historic building, because the preference in the historic guidelines is to be authentic to when it's built, not to be a mimicry of a historic building that you are not that anymore. Which may be something to consider as we move through this as well.
So anyhow, I think this meeting today is probably, Jonah, rather than really coming up with a lot of changes to wording, I think will be more of a philosophical discussion of these issues. And what I would like to do probably is kind of get all of us up to speed on these issues. And then in the interim till next month, let's kind of take those ideas, let's do some more research and maybe do some more editing of this document so that in April, we have something much closer to what we want in terms of specific wording. Anyhow, that would be my suggestion.
And I'm going to throw something at you as well. That's more of a philosophical conversation based on just what we've talked about already. Highway commercial has a 20-foot front setback, which means you can't push items up to the sidewalk like you can in downtown. We may want to have a discussion about the standards in highway commercial, which force those structures and those site plans to look completely different from those which are downtown, or potentially rezoning some of the highway commercial to central business district, which would allow for much more flexible standards.
I think that's a great idea. I think like all that area going east towards I-90 on Park Street, that's currently zoned highway commercial, and there's a lot of buildings throughout there that could definitely use some gentrification. I think in the future, kind of incorporating that whole stretch into the downtown general business district would look really nice.
There is, I'm not sure what street it's on. There's a little building that was originally a realtor office that was built, I don't know, 15 years ago. It was a brick building, very attractive. And I think now it's a small casino. But that was somebody's attempt to build a historic, pretty much a historic building. Wasn't set to the street, it was set back so that there's parking in front of it and to the side of it. But I think it sort of gets halfway to what we're talking about. And then the other building that I might mention is where Ricky's grocery store used to be by the TJ's gas station. It's got the liquor store and the sewing shop in it. And then around the corners, the warm stove and I think a cabinet shop used to be in there. But that's a brand new building that they tried very, very hard to make a building that sort of fits in with the historic caricature of this town. And to my eye, I think they did a really nice job in terms of it feeling authentic and feeling like there was continuity with the historic part of town. So those are kind of two examples we do have here that we can kind of keep in mind.
And either Matthew or Jim, can you remind me where do we have a gateway district coming from I-90 from the east? So maybe that's something that would be worth a discussion. Is we have the gateway district going down into the valley, but obviously there are people coming from the east that will be entering the town that way, and it might behoove us to have kind of a gateway coming in from that way that introduces you to the city, because I think there's so much more or less junk that's basically from the town pump going east. It's all pretty rough.
And I
Yeah,
think, so we don't technically have a gateway anything in the zoning. The sort of thing that we're referring to as gateway are these design standards were intended to be overlaid as gateway districts, or basically gateway design standards. But we're called design standards, so they could be applied more broadly. But that would basically be adopting a map amendment to expand our overlay districts or put new overlay districts basically with these design standards. They were originally designed, and you can tell that they were originally designed to be sort of these gateway design districts just based on the way they're currently written. And so that's definitely something to discuss, is where in the future do we want to overlay the design standards onto the city?
Sean, there is a east side gateway overlay, but it kind of starts at the KPRK bridge and goes east. So it's that big triangle piece of ground.
Yeah,
all the
I
way
thought
up,
that was right,
all the
yeah.
way up.
But there's,
The big
Yeah.
triangle at KPRK is not currently in the city, so that is not city regulation.
Right,
yeah. Yeah, I'm thinking of basically between the bridge and Town Pump.
right. Right, and so you can kind of see that, if we could in our minds erase the freeway from this town, that was basically the east entrance to town. Well, originally it was the Myers Landing was where the bridge was that brought us into town. And when that washed out, then they built the bridge over by KPRK. But you can kind of see when you look at what buildings and businesses are out there. There was 2 grain elevators, there was a farm implement dealer, there's welding shops. So those were service industries which related to the agricultural activity, mostly up the Shields Valley. And a lot of that is kind of gone now. The agriculture certainly. And so we just have a lot of these businesses. They're local businesses. These are business owners that have been in town for generations, and they just kind of have this quiet existence and make a living doing that. Now, I suppose over time, there's going to be pressure. These people are going to retire or die out, and those properties will change hands. And so we ought to have a plan in mind for when there are transitions there.
Yeah,
and
you-
most
Quick
of those
question about
buildings are-
housing. I
Go
have
ahead,
my
Michael.
Go ahead.
So Matthew, you mentioned wanting to make sure that we were able to keep housing protected in those areas. So if we were doing like a multi-use space in those areas and the building was commercial on the bottom, housing on the top, how do you not over constrain ability to create affordable housing with development like that?
A lot of it's parking, but that's not really what we're talking about. But things that make buildings way more expensive to build, obviously, are going to be problems for affordable housing. So, there's cities that require things like brick facades, really expensive, balconies, really expensive. Things like that are what's going to hamper, I wouldn't say affordable housing development, because generally the market rate housing is going to be super affordable, but that facilitate sort of mid-range market rates, rentals and apartments. It's basically making sure that the regulations don't make buildings really expensive, and certain design standards can make it really expensive, and then really long review processes, which I don't expect to happen, but those also can make building really expensive. But yeah, it's things like brick and balconies and potentially really restrictive design standards can really hamper affordable housing. So yeah, I would caution that we don't go too far down that road, to be very prescriptive in that way. Anything that's in the design overlay district, if it's mixed use like commercial, it's going to be subject to the standards because it's going to be considered a commercial building.
And the other thing that, to the extent we can encourage mixed use buildings where you have commercial on the ground floor and then you have 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 stories above it, if we can increase substantially our building stock in this town in terms of residences, that's probably more than anything is going to keep a lid on the cost of housing in this town. I don't know that we'll, in terms of affordable housing, I just really doubt whether that's viable commercially without some sort of subsidy or separate financing of some kind to bring the cost of those units down.
Yeah, I would never expect to see anything below 70% area median income affordability level without some sort of subsidy or nonprofit developer being involved. So I think what we need to make sure is happening, because we do have a housing problem. If you look at the rental market right now, there's approximately 0 rentals on the market. We need to make sure that we're not pushing those sort of 70 to 120% area median income rentals into the 150 to 200%. So not everything ends up being luxury units because it's so expensive to build a building.
Okay. So just in terms of getting back to where we started here in terms of these objectives for building design, how do we ensure that there is high quality design? Or how do we ensure that we reflect the design traditions of Livingston? What kind of wording is in that? Are these just suggestions that we hope that builders and developers follow, or is there any way we can put teeth in these so that we enhance the quality of this town?
Jim, I think you were right in talking about maybe having a philosophical discussion about what we want to see. A lot of stuff that I pulled out of the original recommendations was about pedestrian scaling the building. It wasn't necessarily particularly design heavy on specific buildings and elements on that building. And I think that's a really good way to go about it. But it may be a discussion to have with the whole board about what is the end goal philosophically, or literally end goal of the design standards. What are we trying to get at? So maybe we can work that way through and then sort of go back through the design standards and make sure we're getting to that end goal that we're looking for.
Do we need to have a broader option for public commentary on these rather than, I mean, we have rarely publicly attended meetings. I'm just kind of curious. I feel like this would be an area that a lot of people would be interested in engaging in. And we're not really
There's so much going on now. The growth policy is a big operation. There's been tons of input there. There's been tons of meetings there. It's just thrilling to see it happening in this town. And also there's, the Parks and Trails is meeting. I don't know, there's a certain kind of isolation or segmentation to all of this work they're doing. And I personally have not been interacting that much with these other committees. Now, we should be certainly. I've had a lot of thoughts about landscaping in town and growth policy issues, but I just haven't had the drive to fully, participate in that. But yes, at some point, I do think we need to open this up to the public and make sure that people are aware of what we're thinking and have some input into it. I do know that PCEC is, anytime something goes from us to the city commission, PCEC is looking at that. And I don't know to what extent they're providing commentary to the city commission, but they seem to be aware of what changes we've made so far.
And these meetings have been noticed like all of our other meetings, and nobody seems to want to show up. That may indicate that nobody is that interested in zoning because it's kind of wonky, or that we're making it too wonky. I'm not sure. I do think that if we are going to do a full-scale zoning rewrite, which may happen sooner rather than later, we will need to discuss how we want to go about that process. For this, it depends on how far we go, I guess. I don't see these what we're currently suggesting, and I don't know how far we're gonna go with new updates. That's not overly onerous on anyone. So, the public's always welcome to show up and make comments, and it's noticed and it's available to the public. If we start changing large swaths of the zoning, we may need to have a discussion about getting the public involved on the ground floor, on the philosophical side of things, on what they want to see. But this has been a very clear directive from the city commission and from the public that, hey, we want to work on large scale retail regulations. So I think we've already had that discussion with this specific suite of updates. But it is a good point. And if we do start really updating the zoning, we will do a different type process probably. That's more charrette-y discussion based type thing. People tend to not really care about zoning until it makes them really mad or affects them personally.
Happens next door.
Okay, well, let's just it's 6:30, so we got a half hour to go. Maybe we can just kind of look through the rest of this section. Anything that pops out in your mind, let's make some comments on it. Here in B4, where it says promote buildings that reflect pedestrian scale. I don't know what that means, and I don't know where a good definition of human scale or pedestrian scale is. Maybe we can find some words that do it.
I have some good language from the Austin stuff that I can share. They're super into that. They're also into artistic expression and creativity, and they're like philosophical, talking about design standards, of course, right? Yes.
So maybe it seemed to me we should kind of work on that. I started to throw in some new language in here that was fairly specific in terms of the scale of buildings, but I'm not sure even if I've put it in the right place here. But what does pedestrian scale mean? What are we trying to get at with that term? In other words, if you're walking downtown in Livingston along Main Street, that's a certain scale there. There's a repetition, the buildings, each business is a certain size, the floors are a certain size, the windows there's a rhythm to the windows. What are we after there? What is the feeling? What is the experience? What are we trying to create for the people in this town as new businesses are developed, new buildings are put up? What are we getting after there?
And this may be a good point to talk about sort of the philosophical side of things. Sort of this section, which is the objectives, is really like the philosophy of the rest of the standards. So I maybe would like to ask the commission if they're okay with these objectives, if they think there should be more objectives, or these objectives that are listed in this section, which is just section B. So it's like 1 through 4 here, need to be changed or tweaked in any way to really get at what you all are trying to get at with the update of the design standards.
I definitely want more in there.
More in what? Like more
like explanation of like what we're trying, like aiming to get at from that philosophical perspective. I don't know, here. La la la. So I like this, what some of this kind of stuff says, and I think there's aspects of this in here, but I don't know if it's in a clear space, if that makes sense. Is this what you're talking about, Matthew?
Oh.
Like just more language? Kind of.
Yep. I can see the Austin bleeding through a little bit, but yeah, I gotcha.
I know. I know. You can take the you can just pretend that we're talking about Livingston. But I do think there's a lot of language already in the growth policy that could come into this section of the design standards. I think there's some pretty clear characteristics and desires that the public have listed and how they want things to be designed and how they want stuff to feel that could definitely come in here and make this more explicit.
I think that's the perfect spot to take that from. With all the
Yeah,
effort.
and
they've put in.
Michael, hopefully you could, get some of those ideas and take this document and insert your ideas into it, and then we can look at it next month. The one thought that I have is, we've got this buildings reflect pedestrian scale. The one idea I have is that we should design our buildings to encourage social interaction. And in thinking about the growth policy, one of the objectives I have is that we need to build community here. We've got a lot of churn. We got people moving in, people moving out. There's a lot of newcomers here, a lot of newcomers that are trying to fit in and become part of the community. We got a lot of old timers who are feeling alienated. It's one of the major social issues we've got in my mind. And so anything we can do, my idea of community is built by social interaction, time after time after time, and you just build it up over time. And so anything we can do with our buildings to get people to stop and have a chat or sit down over coffee or, whatever that might be, the Shane Center, we can have events, any of that kind of thing. So that's a possibility for an objective. Michael, do you have any specific ideas that you might want to throw in here?
Not off the top of my head, but I do want to go back to the growth policy. I'm happy to look through and pull some pieces out.
Okay.
We can talk to.
The question I have, because I've now heard growth policy from a few of you, the growth policy is not finished, obviously.
Sure.
Do we want to put some of this on hold? And I know that's a word you don't want to hear until the growth policy is adopted. So we have that growth policy will include a specific set of zoning recommendations as well as goals and objectives related to things like this. Do we want to put this section specifically on hold until we have a growth policy that lays that out and work specifically on the parking standards, which are more sort of zoning design type stuff, and maybe some other items, and then come back to this once we have a growth policy that can guide the philosophical discussion? Or do we want to move forward with what we have in the draft growth policy right now and sort of hope that that's how it stays?
Where are we with the review of the growth policy pieces?
We have hopefully, well, the goal was to get those meetings done in a recommendation to the city commission by the end of April. We're close to that schedule right now. I'm not sure we're going to hit it, but that puts us at growth policy adoption if the city commission only holds 2 meetings on the growth policy, which they could hold more if they wanted to, in June. So that would, if we waited, that would put us at July before we went deep into this section again.
Matthew, do you know if I don't remember the schedule of the planning board. Have they worked through the zoning related material yet?
Yeah, so we did chapter 11, which is the one that includes all the specific recommendations for zoning and subdivision regulations. So they've gone through that. So the planning board should at least be relatively finished with that. There shouldn't be any changes from them. It's whether or not the city commission decides to accept all of those recommendations or make all of those changes, where we could have some conflict. It's also one of the criteria for adopting zoning, as you all know, is that it's consistent with the growth policies. So it's hard to say, hey, this is consistent with a growth policy that we don't have yet, that isn't adopted. But we can continue to move forward with this and and hope that everything sort of goes okay, or sort of try to do it simultaneously. I think that's up to you all. But just based on hearing the word growth policy a couple times, it's probably a discussion that we should have.
I really hate to put this off, but I guess I'm just sort of wondering if we could get a copy of the zoning related growth policy sections and use that as the basis for any changes we might make here. And then who knows when this, we'll have it finished to go to the city anyhow, but at least it would give us a earlier start point, or rather than push everything into the future so far. I guess I would like to keep working on it.
And I will say that I believe there's a line in the current growth policy that says work on large format retail regulations. So I don't think any of this is inconsistent with our current growth policy. Our current one just doesn't give us nearly as much guidance as the future one will.
Matthew, can you send around a copy of what they've done already?
Absolutely can do that.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, it is 6:46. So just looking at the rest of this section, we have building and topography, building character, primary building entrance, street level interest, building mass and scale, roof forms, and then it's a little bit on signage, and then an administration section. Section J here is design standards administration. So this is the section that kind of details out how any applicable commercial project would be evaluated by the design review standard. So that, I think that's kind of the end of it right there. And as Matthew said, that's done in-house at this point. So there has to be an application and a site plan and some other detailed drawings. Has to be an economic analysis, a traffic impact study, and a wildlife and natural resource study. That would have to be submitted if there was a design review process. So I'm not sure where to take this, Matthew, in terms of the rest of today and then what we ought to work on next time. You mentioned that next time we could possibly get back on some of the parking. And just to get more specific about that, is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I mean, next time we could, we talked about parking standards in that section last time and landscaping. We could do an official amendment at that point. I can notice it and we can move that forward to the commission if you all want to do that. I've just a sort of side note on that. I've been thinking a lot about the 30-foot landscape buffer, so that may be a discussion to have next time as well. I'm sort of like getting pulled in both ways on that one. I think if we are going to discuss changing setbacks for highway commercial, we may want to do that at the next meeting before we adopt anything. It just depends where you all want to go with this. I hear a lot of, we want to be kind of things to look like the historic development pattern, which we've also heard a lot through the growth policy process. The thing to do maybe at the next meeting is to have a discussion on what stops current commercial zoning areas that are outside of the central business district from looking like that, and maybe having a discussion on that as well. But I am happy to leave it up to you on where we want to go with this at this point. I think we're pretty much ready to go on at least parking and landscaping to get that moving towards the approval, if we want to do that, and we can have some other discussions at that time as well.
So Matthew's suggestion is that we've done kind of an overview of the design review process, that next month we go back to the parking and maybe landscaping and finalize that and take a vote on it and approve it. And then he can submit that to the city commission and try to get that approved. And then in the meantime, he will send out copies of the planning department's changes to the growth policy that affect zoning, so that we can review that. And let's put that on the agenda for next month. And then I guess at that point, make a decision on how to proceed.
Can we also get like the community character, some of the more general intro on the growth policy, if those areas have been updated? Matthew, not just the zoning, but have those areas kind of been gone through at all?
Yeah, so there was a history section added to chapter 1. I don't think it's going to be particularly helpful to you for zoning. There is a survey in one of the appendix, which was sort of community character preferences that was done as part of the growth policy process to see what people liked. There's a summary of that if you want to see it. That may be more helpful. I can send you chapter 1. It's nothing that's going to affect zoning, but if there's a much longer history section in there now.
Okay. If you think it would help guide the sense of town, then maybe, but if not, maybe not.
I think potentially in chapter 2, we added a little bit of a summary of that survey. And I think there's some additions to that section that might help. So I think I'll probably send you chapter 2, which is community character, the community character chapter 3, which is land use, and chapter 11, which contains specific recommendations for zoning updates,
Awesome.
which will hopefully be small enough to fit into a document that I can email to you. If not, we'll figure it out.
Okay.
And then if anyone does want additional chapters, all of the materials and updates that we've worked on so far, if you go to the city's website and under the city boards tab, there's a planning board webpage. If you click on that, and under all of the agendas, I've been putting all of the materials for all the planning board meetings, which will not only list out the changes that have been made by the planning board, but all the chapters that they have worked on are in those packets. They're like 150 pages long each. So you can always look at everything that the planning board has done up to now, sort of in little chunks, if you want to, on our website. And send me an email and I'm happy to send you the links to where those are.
Thank you.
Okay.
Do we need to take our public comment before we adjourn?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, I guess the last thing just to say is to encourage all of you zoning commission members to think about this opening section under building design standards, the objectives for building design, and think about that in terms of what you would like that to be, what changes or additions you might make to that. Okay, so Ms. Love, do you have any thoughts or questions at this point?
Yeah, so with the building design standards, I really would like to see the whole community, but I think zoning is where it kind of starts at, because you got to have the zoning, then the actual right. When I say authentic, I mean authentic to a small community that is like a village. This land is also native land, and so there's a deep culture to that root that I think should be expressed. And I also think we should be thinking of our future with our children and what they will be exposed to when it comes to climate change, and keeping in mind that we should have more of a sustainable and cultural and authentic of the culture of both sides of the culture. But and so sustainable, I would like to see more art in here. I mean, when I think not keeping it to a historical way of keeping it the exact same, but keeping it in a modern way where it is still a village, it's still a small community that's resourcing its value from its own community, and also growing with the modern times of being sustainable and enhancing its perspectives on all culture that it's coming from this land.
Okay, thank you. That's a big menu. That's a big, broad,
I have like a lot. I have a very big idea, and I'm trying to get in words, and I'm trying to get it in a way where I can really present it to the city manager and everyone who is involved. But I really think I would like, being part of this community, raising my kids in this community, hoping to make this community continuously my community where my kids are raised at, but pushing where it's going to be artsy. I am from Austin, Texas. I love the art there, and I love and I see what we deal with now is that we don't have sidewalks for wheelchairs or strollers or walkers. We have obnoxious buildings that are being popped up, and more modern, very richy buildings and homes that no one can afford who are local. So I think everybody needs to really think about the culture of this land, of natives, and of just those who have been born here when it was first a train town. And also really try to combine that with where the future is heading and where we really need to go as a community with being sustainable and being more of a place of resources for all ages. I don't think enough communities or anywhere in society really prioritize their youth and making things more available for them to be participants in where they live and their life. So I feel really strongly about it. I have a lot of things to say, and this meeting is very unique. It doesn't feel like the other meetings that I do go to. It feels like it's more open. I can be part of this conversation. And I am interested in zoning because I know the steps of how how things work, but I would like to see it be more focused on community, all age of community, youth and older. And I don't think people are interested. I just don't think there's enough education and information out there for people to understand of the necessity of being involved.
okay, so thank you very much. I don't think you've said anything that certainly I would disagree with. Now it's, you're taking a pretty wide perspective on this. And I know in my own thinking about zoning, it's hard to take the big picture, and our job is pretty narrow and pretty specific and fairly technical. And that's, in my mind, that's the hard part. It's like, how do we take this goal, this vision, this need, and write it up in a way legally that it will make an impact on the future of this town.
I think the priority of all people and the history of it, the parking and zoning of sidewalks and building design should be accessible to all ages of in all abilities and all aspects of humanity when it comes to being respectful to the individual right of who they are. Like I mean, and it pushes me because we don't accommodate overweight people. We don't accommodate elderly people. We don't accommodate children. You can't find a small toilet in any restaurant for a child to actually use it. It's more geared towards tourists who are going to eat lots of food and spend lots of money and buy lots of things and leave, and kind of just leave us with the aftermath of what they're experiencing in a moment compared to what we live with on a daily basis. And so it should accommodate all factors of humans that walk the path of this land.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Well, it's 7 o'clock. Maybe I'd like to ask for any closing comments from commission members. Are we clear about our next steps? I think Matthew's got his marching orders. And I think we are looking at this objectives of building design issue, and we'll be receiving some material from Matthew. So we'll see you in a month. And I thank you very much for coming. I thought it was a pretty wide and broad-based and very interesting discussion. And Matthew, I appreciate your contributions. So I'm calling this meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
night, y'all.
Good night, guys.
Good night.